So one of the big new systems and pieces of content coming to Season 3 of Diablo 4 was something I really wasn't too excited about before, but after we got some more information from the most recent developer livestream, I'm much more excited for the system and it seems a lot more interesting. And this system is the Gauntlet system, which is going to be leaderboards being added into Diablo 4. Now this Gauntlet system isn't going to be added in at the launch of Season 3, it's going to be some amount of weeks after, I'm assuming 2 to 3 weeks, and I'll go over later in this video my thoughts on them not having it on launch of the season, but we first have to go over what the Gauntlet actually is. So the Gauntlet is going to be leaderboards added into Diablo 4, but it's not going to be leaderboards for random pieces of the game. It's going to be leaderboards tied to a new dungeon type. So the Gauntlet is a new dungeon type plus leaderboards. It's all tied into one package. And these new dungeons that are part of the Gauntlet system are much more unique and much different compared to normal dungeons, because these dungeons tied to the Gauntlet are going to be non-linear static dungeons for every week. So say the first week the Gauntlet comes out, it's going to be one dungeon where every enemy is in the exact same location, all the paths are the exact same for that entire week. And your main objective when going through these Gauntlet dungeons is to get as much score as you possibly can within the time limit. And there's a ton of additional things in these dungeons that are going to make that much more interesting. But the reason you're trying to get these higher scores is because you want to get on the leaderboards, and there's going to be a lot of different leaderboards. So there's going to be a leaderboard for all the different classes, then there's going to be a leaderboard for groups, so all the different group sizes, then there's going to be all those leaderboards for hardcore characters as well, and you're going to be able to see the top 1,000 people in every single one of those categories. But at the end of every week, because again these dungeons are set for that week, but at the end of that week there's also going to be something called the Hall of the Ancients. Now Hall of the Ancients is going to take the top 10 players from every category and it's going to save their runs forever. So say the first week of the Gauntlet in Season 3, you go and get top 10 as a barbarian. That's going to save your ranking, going to save your name, probably going to save your build, and probably save some other information, and that's going to be saved forever. So if we're 5 years down the road, you'll still be able to go look back and see that the first week of Season 3 Gauntlet, you got top 10, you're in the Hall of the Ancients. So a bunch of these leaderboards are week specific, but then you have that Hall of the Ancients, which is what a lot of the top players are going to be going for because you're set in stone. You get that top 10, always gonna be there. And I think that's actually one of the most exciting parts for people who care about leaderboards. And then when going through all these leaderboards, you can also filter them for a bunch of different things. So if you only want to see, say, players in your clan, you only care about competing with them, you can do that. You can filter it so it's only your friends. So you're gonna have a bunch of different filters if you just want to compete with specific groups of people as well. And there's also going to be different loot rewards for getting certain points in the leaderboards or even getting onto the top 1,000. There's probably going to be some pretty big rewards for getting into the Hall of the Ancients. And while actually doing these Gauntlet runs, you don't have to worry about looting anything. All of the loot you'll get at the end. So in the dungeon, you're just focused on maximizing how many points you can get while in there to try to get the highest leaderboard position you can possibly get. And that was all the information we had before the most recent developer livestream. This is a system I really want to care that much about. I really don't care about leaderboards in most games, but some of the new information we got from this developer livestream makes these much more exciting, even if you still don't care about leaderboards, just because of how unique these dungeons are going to play. Now, as mentioned, these dungeons are going to be set for a week. It's going to be the same dungeon. It's going to be non-linear, so you're going to have a bunch of different routes, but it's going to be set. Every enemy is going to be the exact same position. Bosses are going to be in the exact same position. So the main things you're going to be looking for is how you can min-max your routes, what enemies you want to kill at what points, what routes you actually want to be taking. But then there's some additional things that they added into this system that makes it much more exciting. Now, they started off this run of the Gauntlet where they showed us where you actually start at a boss fight, but this boss fight room at the very start of the dungeon is not locked off. So you can pull that boss at the start and pull it with you throughout the dungeon. Now, one of the big reasons you'd want to do that is you could AoE everything down, but also when killing a boss, it drops a shrine, and there's some new shrines that are going to be in the Gauntlet as well. The one they actually showed off was a Pillar of Proving. Now, this will revive all enemies within a certain radius that were killed. So this can obviously get pretty crazy. If you say pull that boss to a specific location, kill it, it spawns a Pillar of Proving, then you could potentially go throughout the dungeon, group up a ton of enemies, bring them over to the Pillar of Proving, kill them all, pop the Pillar of Proving, and revive everything, basically doubling the score you can normally get if you were doing this dungeon in an inefficient manner. Now, I don't know if, say, a Pillar of Proving would respawn the boss and you'd be able to kill it again to get another pillar. I assume that's probably not how it's going to work if you get a Pillar of Proving. Now, I'm not sure if it was specified if these shrines would be the exact same every run. If you kill that boss, would it give you a random pillar? Or if you kill that boss, would it be the exact same pillar for the entirety of that week? Not 100% sure, but some of these new shrines are going to add a massive amount of variation and skill to trying to maximize your score for a run. And then there's going to be some other things throughout these runs, like opening up chests can give you keys that are going to give you a bonus to your score in some way. There's going to be a bunch of different elements of these gauntlet runs that play substantially different compared to normal dungeons throughout Diablo 4. Because again, as these are preset dungeons that are non-linear, you have a bunch of different paths you could take. Your routing or what enemies you kill when you kill them could be completely different from somebody else's, and there's no objectives in these. It's just a timed dungeon that you want to get as much score as you possibly can get. So you want to optimize the route as much as possible. And then if you're somebody that also wants to try it in groups, getting into a 2-player group, a 3-player group, a 4-player group, those are going to have their own different leaderboards because those are going to be substantially different compared to playing solo. If you're in a 4-player group, you would send every player off in their own direction to try to min-max. You could potentially even have a boss that drops a Pillar of Proving. You guys kill a boss in a specific location, then you have your whole group of 4 go in different directions, pull half or most of the dungeon's enemies to a Pillar of Proving, kill it all, then respawn it all with the pillar, and then just like double your score. So there's going to be some pretty ridiculous possibilities in here. And if you're somebody that really cares about leaderboards, or if you're somebody that just enjoys the challenge of this type of dungeon, there's going to be a new one every week as well. So every new week, there's going to be a new dungeon layout, and new leaderboard score to try to get for every single week. And then you also have all the different classes, because again, all the different classes are going to have their own leader. So maybe you play like a druid one week and you want to try to get Halls of the Ancient on a druid for that season. And say you get it, you could then play a build on a different class, and that same dungeon on a different class would be completely different. The scores are probably going to be completely different for specific weeks. Maybe one week it's a big open dungeon where you can pull a lot of enemies, and maybe like a pulverized druid is going to be really good. But then maybe there's another dungeon that has a lot more movement, and maybe something like a rogue could potentially move throughout that dungeon much quicker to get to different points that are going to be better. So maybe rogues are just going to have a lot more score than say druids for that week, but as they're split up in their leaderboards, you're still just going to be competing with your own class. Now obviously it's going to get a bit more crazy once you get into groups, because you could have any combination of classes you want, but this is going to be a much more competitive system compared to something like Rifts from Diablo 3, where a lot of the competition from like Rifts or Greater Rifts mainly came from trying to just get that perfect rift that was much better than all the others. So a lot of the top scores came down to how many rifts could you sift through to try to get the best one. And I think this is just going to be much more competitive and much more fair. Now, as I mentioned, the Gauntlet is going to be coming out a handful of weeks after the launch of Season 3. I don't think they specified exactly when it would come out. Like I mentioned, I think it'll probably be 2 to 3 weeks after the launch of the season where the Gauntlet comes out. Now, there's 2 ways of thinking about this. A lot of people, when this was initially revealed that the Gauntlet would not be on launch, were saying that it's just going to kind of ruin the Gauntlet because everybody's already going to be full built, level 100s, possibly have a bunch of uber uniques. So it's just going to be like the top 0.1% of people that are going to get the top scores because everyone knows the meta. But then after learning that it's probably going to be sooner than we thought, and after thinking more about it, for Diablo 4, this is probably the better choice, because if you release this too early, if you release this on launch, what that's going to do is that first week or first couple weeks, it's just going to be people who have more playtime, because you obviously have a bunch of playtime to get to 100, then you have a bunch of playtime to just farm up more gear. You can target farm uber uniques from Duriel, so it's just going to be people who can play more. Once you get later on, once you get say 3 weeks down, a month plus down, everybody is going to start to get more compacted in terms of the overall power of their character, because once you get to 100 and once you get a decent set of gear with some of the uniques you need, there is not a massive amount of power difference between like a week of play or between the best players and the players slightly below them. The power gap starts to get smaller and smaller as time goes on. So I think releasing it 3 weeks after launch is probably going to be better, because I think that's going to mean that the power gap between the best players and players below them is going gonna be smaller than it normally would be. Now, obviously, the people that have ridiculous playtime are still probably gonna be better in general, but I think this is actually gonna be much more fair, especially in a game like Diablo 4 that is a AAA game, so it is obviously built more towards casuals than super hardcore games. Like if this was Path of Exile and they had a system exactly like this, it would probably make more sense to release it at the launch of the season because Path of Exile is already going to be much more hardcore players, but AAA games are always built for a more mainstream, more casual audience, so it makes more sense to try to allow more casual players to be on a more even footing when something like this is released. But overall, I'm much more excited for the Gauntlet than I thought I was going to be, and I think it's going to be a pretty interesting new variation on dungeons for Diablo 4. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.